in the nation, approved by the federal court, the Department of Justice, and our monitoring team, did not serve us well at all in 2020. We found ourselves in a completely different environment, ill-prepared to deal with direct attacks on police, and again being ordered by the city to hold lines that probably never should have been held. We pivoted late in the summer of 2020 and started to really adapt our crowd management policies. Starting in late 2020 and in 2021, we worked, and actually all the way through, I think it was 23, we worked with the Office of the Inspector General and the Sentinel Event Review to examine what happened in 2020 and learn and evolve from that. So our crowd management policies were updated in 2021 with a much stronger focus on dialogue, de-escalation, and curtailing the use of the tools and narrowing the scope of that. And that was approved by the federal court, the monitoring team, and DOJ in 2021. And then we have updated them in accordance with continued guidance from the Sentinel Event Review and from our own use of force review board findings, and of course the modifications to state law around tear gas and approaches to crowd management. The state did issue a document on, quote, best practices in crowd management. We are mostly in alignment with what the state is proposing on that. The term best practices is one that gets thrown around a lot. I think as the commission does its research, and certainly as we have done our research and dug into this, I don't know that there is an identifiable best practice. I think there are emerging and promising practices, and we are doing our best to iterate and move towards what will do the least harm and help facilitate our community's interests best we can. So I guess what I'm trying to say is this is going to be an imperfect science, but I think we've hit the sweet spot based on all of the national awareness and modifications that have been made over the last few years. So with that, I would propose to bring in Chief Underwood and members of our team to show their part of this. Again, if we're talking about tools, things have gone very wrong already. We should have been engaging, and hopefully we can minimize the use of such tools. I will highlight that since 2020, SPD has not deployed a blast ball, despite any restrictions on doing so. We've also had almost no use of force in crowd management circumstances since 2020. There have been a few isolated incidents, but for the most part, use of force has not been a centerpiece of any of our crowd management efforts over the last 4 years. So with that, we will bring in the team.
How should we prepare? Yeah.
So I'm looking at a camera up there. Is that the one that's operational?
Yes. For the
Yes.
So would you recommend we go to the front of the room and present from there?
That's a great.
And then they can turn and show the camera so that people can see?
Perfect. That works. Yeah. Why are you doing this?
I don't know. Well, I see it on my screen, but I don't see it on that screen.
Okay. Well, as long as it's showing up on the.
I see the room view on my
That's
screen.
good. So that if they show the camera, then everybody online should see it.
Yeah, great.
Perfect. All right. You get the up close view over there.
Yeah.
Do you have any notes or
Morning.
Hi. Good morning. Welcome. Good morning.
Hi everyone, I'm Assistant Chief Yvonne Underwood. I have the Professional Standards Bureau, and this is Lieutenant Matt Hendry. He's got 26 years on the department, and Officer John Rousseau has got 16 years in the department. Oh, I can just sit by you if that's okay.
Okay, so again, good morning. I'm Lieutenant Matt Hendry. I'm current commander of the SWAT team. Officer John Rousseau is one of our team leaders. He's also kind of our subject matter expert on less lethal. So I don't know what CEO Maxey kind of briefed you on before we came in, but just so you know, so these tools are all used for both, our crowd management stuff as well as more of our SWAT style street stuff and other missions. But I think it's important to note when we talk about crowd management. Are you guys familiar with the crowd management intervention and control matrix a little bit?
From our policy.
So it's from our policy, and I think it's just important to note that there's basically 6 steps within that matrix. And these tools would only apply to 5 and 6. So if you look at the steps 5 and 6, 5 is basically a riot, and then 6 is an immediate life safety event. So just kind of put it in perspective of when these tools will be used. The other steps, are using our police officer engagement team, all the other low-level, non-force types of things for crowd management. So I just wanted to kind of get that out there and put it in perspective when we would use these tools. Any questions on that before I continue? Okay, so I guess we'll just kind of go through and kind of start off with our lower level. Yeah, actually.
And Lieutenant Henry, just be aware that you've got the camera behind you,
Oh,
all
okay.
the other commissioners, so anything you want to show us, we should show to them as well.
We do have some handouts, if anybody would like a handout, kind of the spec sheets for some of these. We can pass them out.
So we have one for each of the items. We can probably get more if it was needed, but all this stuff is just online stuff available from manufacturers. So where do you want to start?
What do we talk about?
We can have to be send those.
Yeah, we'll send us the papers, yes?
You guys should have them from previous meetings. For the
We'll send them around to commissioners after the meeting. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Alright, so
Okay. So I'm sure many of you remember from 2020 glass balls. Also show the camera here. So we have the 2 types of glass balls we use are inert, which means there's no chemical agent within this glass ball. There's no pellets either, right? It's just
no.
So it's just a loud explosion, and that's to try to change the behavior of a crowd, cause enough of a kind of a startle response to where the behavior changes, and you kind of hopefully get them to move along. This one actually has a little bit of OC powder in it, so it will cause a little bit of irritation. And for those that don't know, OC is basically the same as pepper spray, same that officers carry on their belts, or what we also kind of use for some type of crowd management. So just a powder in here to cause a little bit of irritant. And again, so in order to deploy these, we're talking about getting up to level 5 and 6 to try to move a crowd along, to try to change behavior. They're deployed away from people, not at people. If they are inadvertently deployed at a person, they're unlikely to cause injury. Very low level of force, ultimately.
Can I ask a question here? I don't mean to interrupt. If you were to deploy that, what is the range? Like if you did it right there, I'm assuming this whole room would feel it.
Well, are we talking about the OC or the?
The OC specifically.
Yeah, I mean, you would definitely feel the concussion of, and it is a loud blast, and it is loud for a reason to try to change that behavior and stop whatever the person's doing. The OC, I'm sure you would definitely feel the OC. It's not overwhelming. You wouldn't immediately go into any type of medical condition. You wouldn't cough violently. It would irritate your sinuses, your lungs a little bit. But there's not enough agent in here to overwhelm this entire room. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So in the room, everybody would feel it. These
Right.
are more designed as an outdoor thing. If you're more than 10 feet away, the wind is probably going to take any type of irritant away really before you even feel it that much. So the irritant is a fairly small area. And then because it is powdered, it's affected quite rapidly by the overall environmental conditions.
And from my understanding, glass balls are used rarely, but when they are used, they're used for crowd dispersal more, to disperse a crowd from a place?
If there's violent actions going on within the crowd.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
In levels 1 through 4,
Mm-hmm.
the tactics for crowd management there are engagement, de-escalation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Any questions on glass balls? Okay.
Sorry to interject here. Let me just clarify one thing. So as you go through the CMIC and you look at the different phases, by the time you get to phase 4, you are dealing with isolated criminal behavior that's either imminent threat to a person or to significant property damage, but it's isolated to certain individuals.
Right.
Then you take targeted action, you try to extract them out of the crowd, rather than making the whole crowd go away, because the idea is to preserve the right to free expression for as many people as possible. So if the few individuals can be remediated without impacting the rest of the crowd, that is ideal. There are certain less lethal tools that could be used to affect that arrest on individuals, but it is not a dispersal action where we are trying to, I mean, it's a big deal. When you say you no longer may be here, what you're doing is you are infringing on everyone's rights, because you've basically said the threat to public safety requires that level of intrusion. We do our best to avoid that, though. That is not good.
Question? At the experts?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Greg.
Thank you. Question for you about the deployment. OPA has in management action recommendations in the past noted that they can be of a 2-stage combustion cycle, and that the first stage can throw the blast ball in a direction that's unintended. Have you experienced that? And if so, how much of that, like how many feet could it throw this thing in an unexpected direction?
I was talking about,
So, the way that these work, just kind of as a quick rundown, you have your fuse, right, and then this net here, and this is what you're talking about. The fuse goes, and then there's an initial charge that is just meant to separate this hard metal piece away from the explosion. So in doing so, if this is airborne, the bulk of the weight is in here. It separates them 10 to 12 feet apart. So this side will obviously not move as far because it's the heavier side of the object. So this side kicks about 6 feet one direction, and this could deviate 2 to 3 feet off of kind of its intended area. Where that really kind of will become more of an issue is if it happens to be sitting on the ground at kind of this angle when that separation occurs, then most of the change in trajectory occurs to the body of the blast balls. So you're looking at 2 to 6 feet of deviation, and there's really no way to guarantee exactly what direction that is going to go. It's not massive. The areas we're looking to deploy them in are areas where that shouldn't be a concern, really, because we're looking for more open spaces for that deployment. Once that occurs, then the blast ball itself detonates, and right where this tape is, it should split in half. That's the way it's designed. The reason it does that is because of that split, it loses its velocity fairly rapidly, causing these two halves to not travel very far. Just anecdotally, I've had one of those that was resting against my foot during 2020 as it went off. Caused no injury, no issues. So they are reasonably safe. So with any of this stuff, there are some random occurrences, but as a general rule, they're quite safe.
So, excuse me, there's a very long history of severe injuries. In 2016, a citizen journalist got a chunk of their face ripped off because of the hard rubber. There's lots of burn injuries. There was actually an officer who had his leg set on fire because of one of the blast balls. So there's a very long history of many dozens of people that have been severely injured. And I mean, what's happening right now, I think, is just disinformation, and it's really not helpful.
Let's move on. I really want to make this so give you the information. You can do with it what you please, but we just want to make sure that you're showing you, and then we're going to get these guys out of here.
I just want to remind folks this is meant to be, we've invited SPD in here to provide their perspective. We have other perspectives we're trying to bring in and have a robust discussion on where we are with these policies. So,
Please, yeah, absolutely, and I don't want them in the middle of a discussion. So their job here today is to just show you the tools, and then you guys can have the discussion without them in the room. Thank
This is
you.
meant to be a commissioner discussion.
Perfect, thank you. We'll go ahead and
I
move
think I
on.
see Commissioner Mullins is maybe
Yeah,
trying to get a
Commissioner Mullins.
question.
Oh, yes, Lieutenant Hendry, just wanted to ask a question for clarity. When it comes to blast balls, these less than lethal weapons are not handed out to just any officer. And I wanted to get an answer from you on that, because of course I already know the answer, but I wanted to be clear. These less than lethal tools are not just handed out to any officer. There's a training involved in this. Is that not true, sir?
Yes, the people that do get them, which I currently believe are only community response group and the SWAT team, do go through annual training and recertification with blast balls.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Excuse me. What is community response group? Is that the same as POET or no?
No.
So our community response group is, it's sort of our Swiss Army knife of officers. We use them for a whole host of things. They can be used for demonstration management. They are also trained in different specialty assignments. And when we need to move emphasis to a certain area, they're usually our go-to team to do that. They also back up other units for some warrant service and for, like you guys handle most of the dynamic entries and all of that, but I think they can go to a certain level. So they're trained to be very fungible resources that we can deploy to different options.
Thank you. And POET is not,
No.
no, they carry.
That is the public outreach and engagement team. That is a team that is in soft polos,
Yes.
khaki pants. They present, they are officers, but they have a much softer presentation to hopefully be able to help, dialogue without any of the, militarized look that a lot of our crowd management gear can lead to, because
Yeah.
we got to keep our people safe too. And there's a lot of equipment to carry, but it can be intimidating. So these are people that are trained to talk, to work with organizers, whether informal or formal organizers, to find out what's the intent of this group. What do you want to achieve? How can we facilitate this? Hey, don't go this way down 4th Avenue. It's really going to be problematic. Can you come down this? Just negotiate and try to accommodate. That's the whole point.
Yeah, and I appreciated the information that Lieutenant James provided to these practices work group. So they don't carry any weapons, or they do, and their presentation is just softer, or for POET specifically, are they also carrying less lethal weapons?
They would be.
Any kind?
They certainly, they're sworn officers, so they
Right.
would be armed.
Right.
I think they, I actually don't know.
They're
what their
carrying their
requirements are.
regular duty belt that you would
Okay.
see any other officer, they're
Just
wearing
on
that.
top of
Yes,
the
yes.
polo. and-
Yeah, but not
Khaki.
specific to what these officers are dealing with. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next.
Okay, the next tool I'll talk about is what we call our pepper ball launcher. So if anybody's ever played paintball before or seen paintball or knows what it is, this is essentially a paintball gun. You attach an air canister to it and a hopper full of pepper ball, which is very similar to paintball. Happy to pass this around if you like. And inside of this is just a little bit of OC powder, Pava powder, and again, much like the OC powder in the blast ball, it's just a small irritant. We generally don't aim these at people unless absolutely necessary. They're not the most accurate, so we try to use them for area denial. For instance, we might deploy them on the ground to try to get people away from a certain area, maybe on a wall above their heads to try to get the OC a little bit more aerosolized, to keep them out of an area. So we use those primarily for some type of area denial. If we do target them at a person, the same targeting applies. We try to go below the waist, large muscle groups, avoid the genitals. Very low risk of injury with the pepper ball as well. Any questions on that?
I think you mentioned passing it around.
Did you want to see the action?
I'm not.
Just don't crush it.
Don't slam it on the table.
Okay, all right, everybody, I'm good.
I don't need to.
All right, next.
Next, I'll talk about our FN 303. This is also a air compressed tool that fires a fin stabilized hard plastic object with a little bit of bismuth in the front. It's like a ground up, I don't know what you would call it.
So bismuth, it's a medical grade, food grade metal. It's actually very similar to Pepto-Bismol. Pepto-Bismol uses bismuth as well. So that's kind of
That's just
the type of. It's, well, in Pepto-Bismol,
I get it.
stomachs, but yeah, so that is the weight towards the front of it that allows the projectile to maintain its trajectory.
So this is a highly accurate tool. Again, target area would be below the waist, large muscle groups. It does cause a significant amount of pain, but not a substantial risk of any long-term injury. So it would be used for somebody posing an immediate threat to the officers, immediate threat to others. Yeah, any questions on that?
Can you remind me what that one is called?
It's called the FN 303. The letters F, N, and then 303. And then moving on, we have our single shot 40 millimeter launcher. Go around.
Yes.
I'll pass this around. This is the crushable foam.
That is the crushable foam. This one is a marking round, so if any of what's in here gets on your clothes, it will not come off.
Don't pass that one
They're fairly stable and hard to crush. They don't crush super easy, but just be aware. This is the same round, but it is it has a small amount of OC in it. Again, back to the same stuff we've been talking about. And then we do have, this is the same thing that is inert. For the most part, we won't use these on deployment. It's mostly for training, but they are in our inventory, so I want it to be visible. And then we have what is commonly called the blue nose or the sponge round. As you guys will feel, that's a much softer hip. The way that they're designed to work is slightly different. And then this is the same thing that is specifically designed for an extended range.
The blue nose is primarily what our patrol officers use for the 40 millimeter program. And again, this is a pain compliance tool. Again, our target area is below the waist, large muscle groups, avoid the genitals. We try not to aim in the torso. And we wouldn't deploy these. These aren't deployed to move a crowd. This is deployed at a specific individual within a crowd who's posing an immediate threat to the officers or others.
Do you want to talk about the difference between 40 millimeter and the FN 303 and why you would use different?
Yeah, so the 40 millimeter it hits hard. It's been, I guess the analogy would be like getting hit with a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, you know, in the legs or the butt. Is basically what the 40 millimeter is. So that's kind of our heavy hitter, so to speak, for somebody who's posing a serious threat, somebody who's about to throw a brick at an officer, or we wouldn't use it necessarily for property destruction. It would have to be something geared towards a life safety or immediate threat type of incident. They're fairly accurate. John can speak to the distance.
They're accurate to about 50 meters, 50 yards. Rarely will we reach out that far. We try and keep all targeting kind of within about 30 yards just because of travel time and distance and the ability for movement to create issues with the aim point.
This entire thing comes out?
No, so,
Just that shape.
yeah,
Oh, just this part?
Yeah.
yes.
And then it's just like, it's just there, like,
Yeah, they're actually quite lightweight. I have the spreadsheet on these.
It would just bounce off.
They just bounce, yeah. So the blue nose and the extended range, the two sponge rounds, those will mostly be intact and they just kind of bounce off. Those other three, the green, the orange, and the harder black one that's not a sponge round, those are crushable foam. that entire head will crush and disappear. And then there's a small payload inside of them of either like an indelible powder, so it won't wash off. So that person will then have a mark on them that doesn't go away. The other one is OC, and then the third one is inert. Again, we typically don't use that in, that's more of a training round for us because it is the exact same round as the other two, but it's a little bit more cost efficient. And so those will completely crush and you'll be left with just kind of a small plastic disc that is what holds the back of it together.
Thanks for clarifying.
Any questions on the 40 millimeter? And then this is just another 40 millimeter launcher, but it's a multi launcher. So we have what, 6, I believe. Yeah, you load 6 rounds into this one, as opposed to a single shot 40. But it's the same rounds as those.
Yeah, 40 rounds.
Sure.
So on top of that, we have muzzle blast, which is just a powder dispersion. So what would happen is when that gets launched, nothing comes out except powder. It comes in both an OC and a CS variant. They are safe at a distance of about 5 feet, according to the manufacturers. They come out in a fairly tight cone. They can be used for area denial, is kind of the big way to use them. They have been used in the past in crowd control. They're not super effective, and our team's kind of gone away from them, but they are still in our inventory and could be used in certain very specific set of circumstances.
And John, what tool would you use to launch those?
That would come out of the 40. And then this is a launchable CS gas, if we ever got to that point. Those were used very rarely. They are not intended for human targets. And the way that we would deploy them is actually into like, the side of a building to dissipate the energy that they have and have them land, and then they would disperse a cloud. And that would be launched out of the 40 as well. And that's kind of the extent of our 40 millimeter options. And those, again, come in both an OC and a CS variant.
And how many of these variants would be carried by patrol?
Patrol carries the blue nose round there.
That's all for patrol.
I just want to make it clear, I mean, we've invited SWAT here to talk about the full spectrum of possibilities, but obviously that is our specialized team that manages all of this specialized weaponry. So generally from patrol, we're not using any of those except the blue nose, which has been, not in crowd management circumstances, but it's been incredibly effective with people with edged weapons that we just needed to drop it so that we could really make the arrest. And it allows for quite a good distance before you have to engage. The problem with tasers and, or at least our prior tasers and pepper sprays, you've got to get pretty close to them before you can use them. And there's also questions about whether those tools are immediately effective, whereas if you've got the time, distance, and shielding, which is our core of our de-escalation approach, you can reach out and touch them from a long distance, see if it was effective, and then go and make the arrest. It's safer for everybody.
Yes. Okay, so these are CS canisters, and I think we need to qualify this with this. If this is deployed by our current CMIC, that means there's an immediate life safety incident. It needs approval of the mayor, and that basically means that all hell's broken loose, and the CS is kind of the last resort to disperse the crowd. So this doesn't get used without permission of the mayor's office or the mayor himself. Then we have an OC version, which obviously we could use. And these are hand thrown, not at people, but just in the area, and they disperse pretty widely. Usually, hopefully, with the wind kind of carrying the product.
So for the CS gas 40 millimeter launcher, and this one again, you said not human targets for at least the other one. So is this again like aerial denial,
Yeah.
yeah, in general.
Correct. Yeah, we try not to throw those at people.
Right.
And we don't fire these at people. These are
Right.
area.
Right.
Yeah.
You just said that, and I was like, oh, coyotes or something.
We just want the agent to disperse and spread. It's
Yeah.
not an individual targeted.
I figured it out eventually.
So, just a couple things in observing the presentation. It, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I have observed is that from the weapons that you have showed, they've gone from what I can tell in what the word seriousness or strength increasing. You showed us the weakest ones all the way to the strongest ones, the CS. I don't know if that's the right one. Is that a fair characterization?
I think that's fair.
Okay. The last one you showed us, which to me seems like one of the most severe weapons you could possibly use in these types of scenarios. You said it requires the mayor's office approval, is that right?
Yes.
Are there any other weapons that require any other level of approval other than the CS canisters currently?
So the incident commander has ultimate say if they're going to be used, but officers also have some independence to defend themselves and defend others. Does that make sense?
So there's some discretion involved in everything except
Yes.
the CS canisters?
Yes.
That's what we're doing. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and on that point, I think it's a really important one. You know, again, officers can use less lethal tools to defend themselves and others because that's not, we're not getting into the dispersal range. It takes an incident commander, and we're about to change policy to raise that up to the lieutenant level and be very specific that it must be a commander, because we use the term incident commander somewhat fungibly within our policy, and currently that could be at the sergeant level, the supervisor. We're just gonna make it clear in our policy that it takes a lieutenant or higher to make that determination, unless we're already at level 6 and there's immediate life safety. That would, obviously take precedence because you have to act and you can't wait for approvals. The current ordinance actually, so state law requires that the highest elected official be the one to determine whether CS gas can be used under any circumstances for crowd management or dispersal. It can be used for other SWAT activities, but when we're dealing with free speech, highest elected official, the current proposed ordinance actually goes much higher than state law and says that the mechanism by which the mayor would grant this approval is after there's an emergency declaration, and then there's an emergency order that is put forth saying these tools may be used. What that actually does is provide some accountability to city council, because they have the ability to vote to end an emergency order or emergency declaration. So there's a balance that this new ordinance has put in there to ensure the process and to the back end accountability for the executive as well.
I had one other question for Mr. Maxey. I don't know if we're going to get into this in our further discussion. So I heard you say something earlier at the beginning of your presentation, and I'm not sure if I misunderstood it or misheard it, or just if you can help clarify for me. I thought I heard you say there's currently no ordinance that specifically addresses some of this stuff. I wasn't quite sure exactly precisely what you said. In my mind, I was thinking, well, we have an ordinance, and now we're being, we're considering a proposed amendment to that ordinance or a new ordinance. What did you mean by there's no current ordinance that does what? What did you mean by that? That's not in effect.
Greg Doss, Central Staff.
Thank you, Greg.
I'm staffing the ordinance and can probably speak to that. The City Council had passed 2 ordinances, one in 2020 and one in 2021. And in both cases, the ordinances did not go into legal effect. In the first case, it did not go into legal effect because it was enjoined by the U.S. District Court. That less lethal that is an ordinance that essentially banned all less lethal weapons, and that was an immediate reaction to the 2020 Black Lives Matter demonstrations. And then in 2021, the council put forward another ordinance which passed the council and was returned unsigned by the mayor it never went into effect because that particular ordinance required approval by the U.S. Department of Justice and by the court. And the executive has not submitted that ordinance to the U.S. Department of Justice or the court for review. Instead, they have put forward this ordinance that would essentially authorize their use of their 2021 revised policies. So currently, as Mr. Maxey says, there's no city ordinance or city law that is in legal effect. You can find it in the Seattle Municipal Code. It says you can't use less lethal weapons at all. But like I said, either by the court or by the language in the second bill itself, neither is in legal effect.
Thank you. And that's just what I want to clarify, because there has been ordinances that have been passed, and CPC has done work on these ordinances in the past. And Mr. Dugar's going to talk a little bit about that, I'm sure. I just wanted to clarify why they're not in legal effect. I thought that's what you were saying.
It's exactly what I was saying. The only thing I would say, amend on that is that we have twice sent, the current ordinance requires us to draft policies consistent with section 1 of that policy. We have twice sent them to the monitoring team and DOJ for review. They've come back to us both times. The first time because we sent 2 policies, our interim and this, and said, here's what we have on the table, help us sort this out. They said, no, city, get your act together, give us one. We then sent over only the ones consistent with the 2021 ordinance to the monitoring team and DOJ, and we put a cover memo on it saying this is why this is grossly irresponsible and will compromise public safety. They said, no, you still don't have your act together, and kicked it back to us. So that's why we're trying to clean this up with this ordinance so that we can actually send them our policy so that we can move forward on the consent decree.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Lieutenant Hendry or Officer Musso, or can we get them out of here?
We didn't talk much about tasers unless I missed it. Can you just maybe speak briefly to the use of tasers in crowd management scenarios?
Well, taser for crowd management is not really applicable. I mean, taser would be, I guess it would only apply in crowd management if that officer that had a taser was immediately threatened by somebody and used a taser to defend themselves. So in that context, it would be as a crowd management incident, but it wouldn't be a tool used for crowd management. Yeah.
Gotcha. And batons?
Batons, like the long baton is used by the line officers. That's generally used to push a crowd, to move a crowd along.
So one of the, sorry, go ahead.
Just question-wise, how about bikes and the bike picket line?
I think that would be a question better left to CRG and the bike lieutenant. That's a little bit outside of my purview, how they train and what they do for the bikes.
What did you just ask?
Batons.
Batons, yes. So if you read the memo that we did submit to the DOJ and the monitoring team about the 2021, and in conversations with council members on this very topic, the intent of that was to push us towards using 40 millimeters more, to use CS gas more, and ultimately batons would become more, to the degree we actually engaged in crowd management, would become a more central tool, which in the initial Department of Justice investigation and the findings was SPD officers have an over-reliance on the use of batons. Here we are a decade later, almost zero baton use by SPD officers. We don't like batons. They hurt people. They look awful optically. And in crowd management, I mean, that's the old school that we've been trying so hard to get away from. So what we said in our memo is, under those rules, we'll intervene when somebody's getting hurt. And that's a terrible place for us to be, because that means we're sitting passively and waiting for injury before taking action, and that's not responsible.
Are there any other questions before we can take them and let them go and move on to the next part of the presentation? Any other?
Brent, you go.
More of a question about like the CMIC and when you step into the level 5, level 6, where you are using less lethal tools.